A black woman walked into a bank, not for charity, but for change, unseen by most, underestimated by many, and about to challenge everything they thought they knew about power. She wore a faded coat. He wore a tailored one. She was black. He was white. She cleaned floors for a living. He managed numbers he didn't understand. When they both stepped into the bank that morning, only one was asked for ID. Only one was told to wait. Only one was watched like a thief. He was offered coffee. She was under suspicion. No one asked about her credit. They had already judged her worth by her shoes, by the bend in her back, by the color of her skin she was born in. But what they didn't know was that the woman they dismissed who had built the very system they abused. And today, she didn't come to cash a check. She came to break the silence, to remind this building who signs the paychecks, to show them that respect is not a luxury. It's a line you cross at your own risk. She stood 3 steps from the front desk, and the air around her changed, not because she spoke, but because she didn't look like someone who belonged. Her coat was second-hand, clean but faded. Her shoes were sensible, not sharp. Her skin was brown. That was enough. The guard shifted. The receptionist stiffened. And the man in the gray suit behind her, white, confident, late, was ushered forward without hesitation. She watched it happen. Not for the first time, not with surprise, but with the familiar ache of someone who's learned to swallow dignity before breakfast. They say America is the land of opportunity. But in that moment, the only thing offered to her was doubt. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't broken a rule. Her only crime was looking like someone who had come to ask, not to own. And while the other customers sipped complimentary coffee in plush chairs, she stood there, still, silent, holding a folder of paperwork with calloused hands. Her name was Ruby. 61 years old, a widow, a mother, a night janitor who had never defaulted on a single bill in her life. All she wanted was a loan, a small one. She needed to fix the water heater in her apartment before winter came. But none of that was asked. The teller didn't inquire about her income. No one reviewed her credit. Instead, the manager was called, not because there was a problem, but because there was a presumption that this woman, wrapped in tired fabric and deeper skin, must have been lost, mistaken, or worse, a burden. So he came, slick smile, sharp tie, soft prejudice. "We may not be the best fit for you," he said, without ever reading her file. In that moment, what Ruby heard wasn't just rejection. It was the echo of every locked door her generation had knocked on. It was the tired voice of America saying, again, "You don't belong in the front of the line." This wasn't the Deep South in the 1960s. This was Fifth Avenue, 2025. However, the code remained the same. It had just swapped robes for policy and slurs for subtle silence. What no one realized, what made this morning different, was the woman standing nearby, watching the entire scene unfold. She, too, had come quietly. Her skin was dark, her coat understated. But unlike Ruby, she wasn't holding a loan application. She was holding the truth, and her name was Alyssa Turner. Most of the staff didn't recognize her. The CEO rarely visited branches without prior notice. Fewer still remembered her background. Before Forbes took the stage at keynote events, she had been the daughter of a cafeteria worker and a factory welder, raised in a Brooklyn walk-up where mice outnumbered books. She knew what it meant to be underestimated before she even said a word. And when she saw Ruby being dismissed, not because of what she lacked, but because of what she looked like, something inside her clenched. Not in rage, in resolve. Because she knew what that kind of moment could do to a human spirit. She had seen talent walk away from dreams because no one opened the door. She had watched mothers turn silent because the world had already decided how loud they were allowed to be. Alyssa stepped forward, not with anger, but with presence. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her authority wasn't worn. It lived in the weight of her silence. The room shifted again, not because of her skin, but because of her power to name what others tried to ignore. She looked at Ruby, then at the manager, and with one sentence, she cut through decades of polite injustice. You just told a woman who pays your salary that she's not welcome. The room froze. A pin could have dropped, and every heart would have heard it. What followed wasn't a confrontation. It was a reckoning. And in that reckoning, we're forced to look closer, to see what's too often blurred by comfort or denial. Because this isn't just a story about one bank. It's a reflection of thousands of institutions, offices, waiting rooms, and classrooms, where assumptions still walk ahead of truth, and appearance still outweighs merit. It's about a nation that calls itself free, but still fears a woman with brown hands asking for what is hers. It's about what we miss, not because we're blind, but because we refuse to look long enough to see. But on that morning, in that bank, someone did look. And more than that, she didn't look away. That's how change begins. Not always with marches, sometimes with moments. Small, sharp, unmistakable. And if you stayed this long, maybe, just maybe, you're ready to see the rest of it. Because the story doesn't end here. This was only the opening scene. No one yelled. That was the hardest part. No slurs, no broken glass, no chaos. Just the hum of air conditioning and the quiet, brutal choreography of avoidance. The kind that doesn't make headlines, but breaks people slowly. When the manager brushed Ruby off with a polite smile, when the guard shifted slightly closer to her than necessary, when the teller offered a half apology and complete dismissal, they weren't being cruel. They were being professional. And that made it worse. Because in that silence lived a message more dangerous than hate. You're not worth defending. Around them, the branch continued to move. Printers whirred, phones rang. A child asked her mother about lollipops by the teller's desk. Life continued, indifferent. But one person noticed, the young woman at reception. Her name was Lex, 27, first-generation college graduate. Polite smile, polished nails, eyes that saw too much for someone told to say too little. She had watched it unfold from behind her desk. Ruby's hands tremble as she folds the loan documents back into her purse. Watched the manager walk away without looking back. Watched Alyssa Turner step in like a blade dressed in grace. Lex knew what was right, but she said nothing. Not because she agreed, but she needed this job. Her mother worked 2 jobs. Her sister had tuition bills. Rent in Brooklyn didn't care about integrity. And in that moment, survival felt louder than justice. So she sat, quiet, compliant, just another name on a payroll, watching the weight of the world shift slightly, and choosing not to move. But inside, something cracked. Not all silence is consent. Sometimes it's a scream swallowed too many times. As Alyssa escorted Ruby to her office upstairs, as the elevator closed on what the staff thought was just another complaint, Lex stayed frozen behind the reception counter. Haunted not by what she saw, but by what she didn't say. The moment passed, but it didn't leave. And later, in the break room, as co-workers laughed about weekend plans, as someone joked about the CEO showing up dressed like a customer, Lex excused herself and went to the restroom. She locked the door. She stared into the mirror and whispered, "I should have said something." Because that's the part no one talks about, the guilt of good people who stay silent. It's not always the bigots who shape a culture. Sometimes, it's the bystanders with soft hearts and tied tongues. It's the fear of losing a job, a reference, a paycheck. The quiet calculations. If I speak, will they fire me? If I complain, will they blacklist me? If I stand up, who will stand with me? And that fear isn't imagined. It's inherited and passed down like furniture in struggling households. Because too many parents told their children, keep your head down, be grateful, don't make noise. But what they never taught, because no one taught them, it was how to survive without losing your soul. And so, in institutions across America, you find people like Lex, not villains, not heroes, just human, caught in the crossfire between who they are and what they're allowed to be. And that is where the story takes a deeper turn. Because Alyssa Turner didn't just come to defend Ruby, she came to test the entire ecosystem, to see who looked away and why, to watch the tension between comfort and conscience. Later that week, Alyssa called a staff meeting, not the formal kind, no suits, no spreadsheets, just chairs in a circle, no desk to hide behind. She looked each person in the eye and said, I didn't come here to fire anyone. I came here to wake this place up. Some nodded, some squirmed, but Lex stood, voice shaking, knees locked. I saw what happened, she said. I said nothing, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't feel safe. The room went silent, and Alyssa, who had once sat in similar chairs, in rooms where she didn't feel safe either, stepped forward and said, Thank you for saying that now. That's where change begins. And it did. Because accountability doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through the quiet courage of someone finally finding their voice. And if you've ever been Lex, afraid to act, ashamed of silence, this story isn't a verdict. It's an invitation to forgive yourself and to promise, next time, I won't stay quiet. They didn't expect her to come back. Not in person, not with a clipboard, not with names. But Alyssa Turner returned to the branch 2 days later, this time with intention sharper than suits and clearer than policy. She walked through the same lobby, same receptionist, same guards, the same scent of sanitizer and distrust. But the energy was different. Because this time, they all knew who she was. And more importantly, what she had seen. She didn't stop at the front desk. She moved straight to the staff conference room where the full team had been summoned without explanation. There were whispers, rumors. Nervous glances were exchanged over lukewarm coffee. Alyssa stepped in. No assistants, no PR team, just a single folder in her hand. When she spoke, her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It was steady. Weighted, like a verdict already written. I want to be clear, she began. This is not about one incident. This is about a culture we've let fester, about a silent hierarchy where race, wardrobe, and job title decide who gets seen and who gets dismissed. She scanned the room, faces flushed, eyes darting. This is a list of every formal complaint filed in the past 2 years, flagged, delayed, or conveniently ignored. Dozens of customers of color, repeated red flags from the same departments, and most disturbing, multiple employees raising concerns and being dismissed or sidelined. She looked toward the regional manager, sitting near the back. You said this branch ran well. Those numbers were strong, but profits mean nothing if we lose our principles. Then she turned to the staff. I'm not here to tear this team apart. I'm here to build something cleaner, better, lasting. And that means accountability. She stepped aside, pointed to a name. Mr. Calden, you've overseen customer lending for over 6 years. Your numbers are impressive. But I have in hand 3 verified cases where loan approval timelines shifted based on personal gain. You've broken trust. You're dismissed, effective immediately. HR will process severance, but you will not be re-employed in this industry under our umbrella. Gasps, murmurs. He stood, white-knuckled, jaw tight, but said nothing, because there was nothing to say. She looked to security. Escort him, please. Next, she turned to the assistant branch manager. I reviewed your internal messages. You referred to Ruby as a recurring nuisance in a private thread. She works nights. cleans up your messes, and never once filed a complaint. Starting next week, she will receive a retirement bonus and have her plaque displayed in this branch. You, however, will be suspended pending retraining on sensitivity. One more infraction, and your position will be terminated. Then she looked at Lex. Last week, you stood up. You named your silence. That takes more courage than most people understand. You also proposed solutions. You identified internal training gaps and suggested mentoring younger employees of color to help them navigate systems that are stacked against them. You have been promoted to community engagement lead. You'll help rebuild this branch's reputation the right way. Lex's eyes welled, not from pride, but from release. She had expected caution. What she got was trust. And finally, Alyssa said, her voice softening, we will not move forward without change visible to those we serve. From this day forward, this branch, and every branch, will display a pledge that no client will be judged by appearance, accent, income level, or occupation. She turned the screen. The pledge glowed across the monitor. Respect is the currency we trade in. Every person who enters this space is valuable, regardless of their shoes, skin, or story. The room was still. Then, slowly, someone clapped. Then another. Then more. Not a standing ovation, not a performance, but a beginning. In the days that followed, Ruby returned, not to mop, but to speak to the new hires about the importance of perseverance. Customers began to comment not only on the service, but also on the sincerity. And for the first time in years, the branch saw a rise not in profits, but in trust. As for Mr. Calden, he applied to 5 other banks. None responded. He became a rideshare driver, working long hours. He told his wife he was between opportunities. But at night, alone, he reread the letter from HR. Your language, your leverage, and your lack of integrity made you a liability. He didn't blame them. He blamed himself for burning down years of reputation with a single whispered deal. That's how legacies are lost. But that's also how new ones are built. With names like Lex, with elders like Ruby, with leaders like Alyssa Turner, who don't wait for culture to catch up, but carve it open, clean the rot, and start again. This wasn't just policy reform. It was a moral reset. And when people ask how it all changed, they won't remember the numbers. They'll remember who dared to say, this stops here. In the weeks that followed, change didn't come with trumpets. It came with small, quiet shifts that no one could deny. The morning after the staff meeting, Ruby walked into the branch like she always had, at 5:45 a.m., gloves in her pocket, lunch in a paper bag. But this time, something was different. Her name was on a plaque at the entrance, not in gold, not flashy, just clean, simple, and permanent. Ruby Ellis, dedication in motion. She touched it gently, the way someone touches a memory they never thought would matter to anyone else. Inside, the break room had been renovated. 2 new chairs, a proper coffee machine, and fresh paint. Nothing expensive, but thoughtful, human. For the first time in 11 years, Ruby sat down during her shift, poured herself a hot cup of coffee, and didn't feel like she had to apologize for it. Customers began to notice, too. They lingered a little longer. The conversations at the counter softened. People called employees by their names, and employees returned the favor, not out of training, but because something genuine was taking root. A new rhythm. A culture not of compliance, but of care. Lex stepped into her new role with quiet fire. She wasn't loud. She didn't need to be. She scheduled weekly listening hours where staff could speak anonymously or directly. She created a mentorship program for new hires from marginalized backgrounds. She worked with Ruby to develop a training video for empathy in customer service, not staged, not corporate, but lived. Real stories, real stakes, real faces. And Alyssa, she didn't disappear back to the 48th floor. She returned. Not every day, but enough. She showed up to strategy calls from the branch conference room. She brought her lunch and sat in the common area. She didn't talk about leadership. She lived it, shoulder to shoulder with her team. Word spread across the organization. Other branches called in, asked for copies of the pledge, asked how to start over. Not just with customers, but with themselves. But change didn't come without backlash. A few upper managers grumbled about woke culture and overcorrection. One even emailed the board, suggesting Alyssa was focusing too much on optics and not enough on profitability. The board met, quietly, reviewed the data. Customer satisfaction, up 38%. Employee retention, up 22%. Loan default rates, down. Net promoter scores, higher than ever. But those weren't the numbers that mattered most. What mattered was that people were walking into the branch and feeling like people, not profiles. The board gave Alyssa full backing, not because she played it safe, but because she bet on humanity, and it paid off. Meanwhile, Mr. Calden, the former manager, was driving nights for a rideshare app. He wasn't bitter, just tired. One night, he picked up a passenger wearing a Meridian Bank pin. They didn't recognize him. He didn't speak. But when the ride ended, he sat for a long moment staring at the rearview mirror, wondering what would have happened if he had said no that day someone asked him to push a loan for an extra cut. Just one choice, one moment. It was never about the money. It was about what money made of him. Back at the branch, the final change came quietly. A new sign was added near the entrance, under Ruby's plaque. It read, "Dignity lives here." Not just printed, engraved. No branding, no slogans, just the truth. Because in the end, that's what Alyssa Turner fought for. Not praise, not headlines, but a culture where dignity wasn't tied to a title, a dress code, or a zip code. A culture where a janitor could retire with honor. Where a young woman like Leeks could lead not by fear, but by listening. Where mistakes weren't buried, but named and learned from. Where a black woman in a thrifted coat could walk through the door and be treated like the CEO she was. Not because she proved it, but she should never have had to. This story wasn't about cleaning up one branch. It was about redefining what a bank can be. A place where trust isn't a transaction. It's a relationship. Where equity isn't a buzzword, it's a baseline. Where silence isn't safety, and speaking up isn't a sacrifice. It's leadership. So if you ever walk into a Meridian Bank and see a new teller smile at you without judgment, if you see someone take an extra moment to ask if you feel seen, it didn't happen by accident. It happened because one woman chose to stop walking past the cracks. She sat with the brokenness, named it and faced it, and rebuilt from the inside out. That's the legacy of Alyssa Turner. Not perfect, but human. And in this world, that might be the most powerful thing of all. By the time the season changed, so had the story. The headlines never mentioned it. There was no viral video, no outrage campaign, just a quiet revolution unfolding behind glass doors and marble counters. Alyssa Turner hadn't set out to become a symbol. She didn't wear the crown of social change. She simply refused to look away. Because she remembered the smell of bleach on her mother's hands, the ache of watching a parent be spoken to like she wasn't there, the cold silence of rooms where you knew the rules, but also knew they weren't written for you. And she carried that memory, not like a burden, but like a compass. That's what made her different. Not her title, not her resume, but the fact that she never traded her humanity for her ambition. In boardrooms, she didn't speak louder. She asked better questions. In policy meetings, she didn't just push numbers. She went for people. And at every turn, she reminded her team of a simple truth. The systems we inherit aren't sacred. They're adjustable. And if we don't rewrite them, we're complicit in repeating them. Under her leadership, Meridian Bank not only became more ethical, but also achieved significant growth. It became a blueprint. Other institutions called, other CEOs visited. Not because Alyssa marketed a new model, but because the results spoke for themselves. Turnover down, morale up, profits steady. Not from shortcuts, but from trust. Because people invest where they feel valued, and people stay where they feel safe. But beyond the data, something deeper had shifted. New employees arrived not just with resumes, but with stories they'd never dared tell before. A single mom from Newark said, "This is the first job where I don't feel like I have to prove I deserve to be here." A former warehouse worker whispered, "I still wear my steel toes out of habit, but no one looks at me like I don't belong." And in a small meeting room, Ruby, now retired, sat beside Lex during orientation for new hires. She told them, "Don't shrink yourself. Not here. Your story isn't a weakness. It's the reason you'll lead better." One by one, lives were rewired. And that's the thing about authentic leadership. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it shows up quietly. It listens harder than it speaks. It pays attention to who isn't in the room and makes space for them. And Alyssa? She never gave a TED talk. She never ran for office. She just kept showing up, with that same thrifted coat, that same sharp mind, and that same question. Who are we leaving behind? She asked for it in meetings, in hiring decisions, in every new branch opening. And eventually, it became part of the Meridian culture, printed not just in employee handbooks, but etched into the daily choices made by people who used to think their voice didn't matter. Because now, it did. And years later, when a young intern from the Bronx, nervous, wide-eyed, unsure, sat across from Alyssa for her exit interview, the girl said, "I used to think places like this weren't made for people like me. Now I want to build one." Alyssa smiled, not wide, just enough, because the point was never to be remembered, it was to make room for someone else's beginning. That's the legacy we don't talk about enough. Not the plaques, not the awards, but the people who now move through the world a little taller because someone made space for them first. So, if you're watching this and wondering if your small act matters, if you've ever felt invisible in a place that claimed to serve everyone, if you've stayed quiet when your spirit wanted to speak, this story is for you. It's a reminder that the world changes slowly. But it does change. And often, it starts with one person who sees what others ignore and refuses to look away. One person who understands that respect isn't extra. It's the baseline. That kindness isn't weakness. Its strength is under control. That leadership isn't power. It's protection. And dignity? Dignity is the most valuable currency we'll ever trade in. Alyssa Turner didn't demand attention. She redirected it. Toward the janitor. Toward the receptionist. Toward the customer who walked in with nothing but hope in their voice. And because she did, the whole room changed. Not overnight, but for good. And maybe that's how we change the world. Not with noise, but with notice. Not by shouting louder, but by seeing deeper. And never, ever forgetting who gets left behind when we don't. This wasn't just a story about banking, it was a story about seeing people. Alyssa Turner reminded us that dignity isn't a reward to be earned. It's right. And silence in the face of injustice isn't neutral, it's permission. We all have a choice, to look away or to lean in, to follow old rules or to write better ones. If this story stirred something in you, don't scroll past, share it, start a conversation, let it change how you see others and yourself. For more stories that speak truth, move hearts, and awaken hope, subscribe to the channel Watch More, reflect deeper, and pass it on. Thank you for listening. Wishing you a day filled with clarity, courage, and kindness that echoes.